Welcome to the Afghanistan Project Podcast. I'm your host, Beth Bailey, and my guest today is Beau Lendman. Beau has spent 40 years helping developing or mid-conflict countries build their economic sectors, and in the process, he made his way to senior vice president of Anham International, where he managed billions of dollars in contracts from the U.S. government in Afghanistan and Iraq. After the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan left thousands of Afghan Anham employees without work, he took on the job of helping them with their special immigrant visa process. In the process, he developed an innovative remote work solution, AfghanHire, which has allowed some SIV applicants to find remote employment while they wait on their visas in Afghanistan. Beau, I'm really excited to talk about your story and this whole process and share it with our audience. So thanks so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'd love to start at not the beginning, but let's talk about September of 2021, Anham's situation as the country fell to the Taliban and all of your former employees are now scrambling to get SIVs. What was that like?
Well, frankly, the Taliban's arrival was unexpected. And while we were winding down our subsistence contract, we were supplying all the food to the U.S. government and NATO as well in Afghanistan. We were certainly winding down operations, but the immediate requirement to essentially shut down and secure facilities, that was not expected. And and nor had we really been prepared for the need to support our former staff with their SIV applications. And because we had relied on, more than 70 different Afghan subcontractors who were direct employers, we didn't really have a proper HR database of all these staff. So there were a lot of different challenges that came. But we were being contacted, almost immediately by, daily hundreds of emails were coming in. And so we needed to have a solution developed to deal with that.
Were there a lot of employees who had applied for SIV after working with Anham previously? Is that something that, everybody really did feel like this was going to be continuing? It sounds like your contract was, while winding down, still ongoing in August. How long was that supposed to continue?
Well, the contract itself, was just very recently terminated. So the contract extended for quite a bit longer than August of 2021, but operations effectively ended.
Okay.
So to answer your other question, there had been, a relatively small number of staff who had applied for SIVs, earlier in 2021 and even before 2021. These tended to be more senior individuals, who had worked with our largest subcontractors, and so but they very few had actually gotten their SIVs. Maybe I only know of a couple that had actually arrived in the United States by that time frame, but many of them have now arrived.
And what was their concern? Were they worried because they had been at American institutions that they would be targeted by the Taliban? There was clearly urgency in that, hundreds of emails every day. So what were you hearing from those individuals?
That was the common refrain. Basically fear for safety and security, based on the fact that they had worked for the U.S. government, for a U.S. government contractor in Afghanistan. So, many would inform that they were hiding or, fearing for their lives, had been subject to abuse. So there was, just a lot of, over time, we heard, everything you can imagine.
Sure. Yeah. I've heard many of those stories myself, and they're really hard to hear. And you took on that role at Anham of managing that whole SIV cadre. So when did that start, and what was it like?
I really took it on in September 2021. It was just, we were inundated with, requests for support, and we started off by working with our largest subcontractors, two or three, that would have had, hundreds to thousands, more than 1,000 staff. And so essentially we had to work through sort of the rudimentary steps of developing a process to validate employment, to establish and confirm their employment details, and to begin generating, compliant SIV letters. Pretty quickly, I started working on developing a database, just in Microsoft Access, which I still rely on, to consolidate this information. And, it's been under development, and being refined, weekly, since then. So, the challenge was really, capturing the information, generating letters, developing, the IT systems to support bulk emailing, and, so that we can engage with, all of these former staff. And, I had some assistance here in the United States for a period of time, that Anham provided. But shortly, Anham's willingness to support the process, ended. But so at that point, I continued as a volunteer, and the process, really has consumed me for quite a few years at this point.
This made me think of something. I've heard a lot of grumblings about Iraq and SIV, and the idea that Anham also had these Iraqi employees. Have you taken any of the lessons learned from this endeavor in Afghanistan and started to apply them to Iraq in anticipation of what may happen there in the coming period?
Well, the situation in Iraq was different. At that point, I was consumed with, actually Afghanistan operations.
Sure.
So I was not at all involved in the SIV work, when the U.S. withdrawal from Iraq occurred. And, and obviously the situation was different. There wasn't, the government wasn't hostile, it wasn't even, hostile towards former U.S. government contractors. But even today, we've had some contacts at Anham related to Iraqis who are interested in SIVs. So that's something recently that came up. And, Anham's legal team at this point is reviewing what's happening.
Sure.
I haven't been involved with it.
Yeah,
but
I'm curious. It's something that's on my radar now, that the Iraqi SIV program is currently becoming a focus of a lot of attention. So I'm not surprised to hear that.
It just recently happened. Just recently, in the past month.
Interesting. Yeah, we'll have to talk about that another time. But back to Afghanistan. What made you feel compelled to continue in this effort as a volunteer once Anham said, okay, we're going to step back from this?
That's a good question. I would say, honestly, I'm a child of a refugee. My mother came to the United States after World War II. Basically, my family, she and my grandmother are survivors of the Holocaust. My mother was a small child. She survived in a Catholic convent in Poland. And so, I felt like this was an opportunity like I had never had before, which is to sort of give back in some way, to, knowing how, what a tremendous opportunity it was for my family to be able to emigrate here to the United States and start a new life. And so it was a chance to do something, in recognition of that. And also, I profited from the work I did in Afghanistan, and I have some mixed feelings about the fact that the U.S. government, spending $2 trillion and with almost nothing to show for it. I made this comment at the beginning. I think the only thing we have to show for it are the people we trained in Afghanistan. So $2 trillion, of training, some infrastructure development, but, a lot of it's been destroyed. But but I think the human capital that was created by the U.S. government, was real, and this was, and there was, to give these people an opportunity to have a good life, to put their experience to work, to serve them. It all made sense, and I felt honored to have this opportunity to provide, this type to do this work.
Yeah, I can understand that feeling, especially hearing all the things you're hearing from people who, had that secure employment and now, getting to AfghanHire, I remember in the fall and winter of 21, all the people reaching out saying, I don't have money for food. I was employed. I'm an SIV applicant and there's no one here to help me. And I can't, how am I supposed to feed my family? And I had to sell my wife's jewelry and I had to do, I'm living in another house, and how can you not respond to those cries? It feels just so horrible to hear someone going from having a very normal, steady life existence, normal as it can be with, the threat of the Taliban on your back as you assist American, any kind of American endeavor in Afghanistan, but then to fall into that circumstance, it's hard to avoid that cry, really.
No, it's heartbreaking. Every day, seeing this and trying, and unfortunately, what we can do, we absolutely do with professionalism and dedication, but there's a limit to what we can do. And it's frustrating that that such limits do exist, but there's nothing we can do. We do what we can.
Yes. Well, and what you're doing has a huge impact. If people can come here on the SIV program, it's a life-changing impact. Yes, and that is something that I want to get to later because, actually, let's talk about the early issues. Were you facing any? I dealt with many cases of the government not being able to help people, or somebody getting COM denied. Chief of mission approval, for people who are unfamiliar with the SIV program, is the first step. You can't apply for the SIV program until you get chief of mission approval, and people would get denials for myriad reasons that seemed so unfair. And so what were some of the early issues, if any, that you ran into while pursuing these SIVs for people?
So, in the beginning, we had to refine our documentation to ensure that the letters that we produced, were fully compliant. So, we had a learning curve, in terms of understanding all the requirements. But, within a couple months, that was behind us. In December of 2021, we learned about Project Rabbit, and we were invited to participate in that. Mm-hmm. It was a giant fiasco from all I can, surmise. But it was fairly, the operations were fairly routine for us until this past December.
Yeah. Should we just talk about this December then? Because you and I have talked about it at length in the past for articles, and about Project Rabbit. That has been a topic of conversation on this podcast before, because just for anybody who isn't familiar, that was originally a DoD enterprise in which the largest contractors that worked in Afghanistan, because it was so difficult to get letters of recommendation and verification of employment for individuals, large groups could use Project Rabbit to do that. They would work with Project Rabbit to ensure that, someone did work for them, and then to create this letter of recommendation. And the situation was supposed to be that you didn't actually then need an LOR, like, oh, Project Rabbit would do that for you. That has not proven to be the case. Also, Project Rabbit then got subsumed into a DOS effort, and now it's called something totally different. Although if you're looking at government-sponsored efforts, you'll still find Project Rabbit referenced, even though it doesn't exist. And IRAP, the International Refugee Assistance Project, did a great wrap-up of the failure of Project Rabbit, and how at first it was like, oh, if you go through Project Rabbit, your chance of COM approval is so much higher. And
Or
then over
faster.
time, right, faster, and you had a better chance of getting it, because on your own, the percentage of people getting it was lower. That was like one detail the Pentagon would give me when I was covering it. They were so secretive about it.
But it's not true.
And well, and I believe it, because now let's talk about what happened in December of 23 to your employees, as you're dealing with this huge database of 5,000 Anham employees.
Yeah. Well, what happened was we started getting, sort of wholesale denials with the simple response that you need to submit a new recommendation letter from a different supervisor. The letter of recommendation you submitted was invalid. And, so these started to trickle in the beginning of December 2023. And, since then we're well over 200 of these denials. And, and the whole flow of NVC verification requests has down to a trickle. And so clearly, there was an issue that we needed to get to the bottom of to understand why this was happening. And so, I've spent the past nearly 4 months, or really 4 months, it's been 4 months, reaching out, to the community of volunteers working to support SIV applicants, connected with IRAP, and quite a few others, to try to share what was happening and try to get some insight into why. And so the good news is that, those connections have resulted in our establishing a direct contact with an official at the Department of State, who has received an initial data submission from us and has, established that she will be engaging with authorities to try to get to the bottom of this, to help us understand what's the solution for us to help these SIV applicants who receive these denials. The big issue, is that the request for a different supervisor. We did a lot. So in 2021, we established supervisors for all of our contracts, including the senior level program management staff, of Anham, or senior people within our subcontractors. But now, 2 plus years later, we don't really have contact with, we have established supervisors and actually there was, more than 20 contracts. So we had this pool of supervisors, but the idea that we could just go out and identify additional supervisors that could provide letters was just really impossible at this stage. We didn't have, the contacts we have are quite stale at this point if we would go back to our own HR records. And it just didn't make sense, because, all of the individuals all the supervisors whose SIV letters were being rejected had all had, hundreds of approvals in the past. So all of a sudden something changed. And, and the government wasn't being transparent about what was going on. It's all along, it's felt like a silly game, like a waste of time, that, instead of telling us what's really going on, they go through this ridiculous process. And at the beginning, in January, I sent out actually 50 test appeal letters, sort of basically saying that, just reaffirming that the supervisors were absolutely qualified, meeting all the criteria required, and and essentially the fact that, after more than 2 years, after all contracts ended, we don't have recourse to other options for supervisors. It was just completely impractical. And, in making an appeal, and, so I wrote a memo to the government that I sent to SIV applicants for them to send in an appeal, which I had a template for their appeal, to the government. And, that effort had no clear success. There were certain people who were immediately, the NVC responded and simply said, you didn't supply a new letter of recommendation. We're not going to, there's nothing further to discuss. There were some that actually NVC responded and said they were forwarding their file back to COM, the chief of mission, for consideration. And there were some that heard nothing. Probably the majority had no response. So since then, we've been engaging, with our advisors and this new contact at the Department of State, and we're waiting to hear. But we're getting at least 100 emails a week, people, what's happened, looking for a status update. And, so the process now is just telling them we're committed to resolving this. We're waiting for guidance. I mean, the idea of, to issue new letters to these applicants that are only going to be rejected again, that would, it would be a waste of time. And so I think it's, our strategy at the moment is that we want to have insight into what's really going on here so that we can, do something intelligent and effective.
Right, transparency.
We are considering that we may, there was actually some discussion that just came up that maybe we will issue a guidance to all these denied SIV applicants that they can submit a letter to NVC indicating an intent to appeal because of course there's a 120 day window to appeal, and that's passing quickly.
That is key here. And, the government gets to do what it wants, it seems like, with the SIV program, and kind of has this laissez-faire approach for themselves. It was supposed to be a 9-month program. And it's funny when you look at like the quarterly reports on SIV, they're like, oh, well, our portion takes 9 months. No, I'm sorry. That's not how it works. It's supposed to be 9 months from start to finish, which means that the parts that the applicant also has to do should be, from start to from when they submit it until now. And they just play all these numbers games to appear to be compliant because they know that groups like IRAP are going to sue them, as they have successfully, and are going to be very loud about this iniquity that continues. It's 12 years into the SIV program, not the interpreter specific program for Iraqi and SIV interpreters, but the one that, are we at 15 to 2009 or 2012? I can't, my brain is not working for me now. I'll make sure it's in the show notes, the right date, but this is not a new program, it's disconcerting.
We all understand government bureaucracy, and
yes,
it is an imperfect system. Let's just say.
Beast. Yes.
Yeah. Having worked in the bureaucracy as a contractor, I certainly saw it at that level as well. So, so we just have to be grateful, and for what we get, and try to get what we want by being persistent.
You're better than I am. I am not grateful for what is, well, yes, at some level. But I think after also being in the bureaucracy myself back in the day, I have very little patience for it. I understand it's hard, though. I do have empathy for the people who are trying to work through that process with all the things that are going on, and, who really do want to make a difference, I think, and have their hands effectively tied, sure, I think, by the bureaucracy that they work in. But one thing we didn't get to in here are the people who had chief of mission approval with Anham and had it revoked as the process of this, because it's one thing to get denied of chief of mission approval. I feel like it's quite another thing to have chief of mission approval and to be waiting on a care flight and to be, expecting to be removed from Afghanistan and finally have a resolution to your concerns, and then have that pulled out from under you. And I know that there were people at Anham who were in that boat. So what percentage of those 200 would you say were COM revocations rather than just denials?
More than 10%. I think last count was about 30. And of course, that's just devastating. People who, reported that they had, sold their belongings and moved to Islamabad, and, were waiting for flights, evacuation flights, had quite a few of those. mean, it's so cruel. It's just, the height of cruelty, insult on top of injury. It's just hard to comprehend, the callousness of, of what was done. To not, for instance, NVC, ASIB, whoever, could have engaged with us, directly. We have concerns about these, especially the ones that had approval, which we had all verified. All of them had been verified with us. So, this is quite unforgivable. This is the worst action of the government that I've seen in this whole process.
I agree. When I heard about it at first, I thought, no, you can't. You cannot do that to these people, especially consider, when did this happen? August of 21 is when many people applied. And those Afghans got some flack for waiting until August of 21. But as you say, and as so many people say, they did not see the fall coming. And so many of these people don't want to leave their homeland. And I've said this on the podcast before. I think a lot of Americans look at this as, oh, well, the Afghans who worked for us just want their shot at the American dream. And if they do, that's great, because if they've earned it, they deserve that. But so many Afghans I talk to say, no, I didn't want to leave the place that my family lives, where my home is, where, there's a deep ancestral tie to these places that Afghans come from. And their culture is deeply tied to that land. And so they didn't want to leave in many cases, but they've been waiting under threat since August of 21. And now 2.5 years later, you have the gall to take away what you said they might be able to get in what was supposed to be a 9-month process. Like, it just, I'll use one of my aunt's favorite phrases. It frosts my flakes. It really gets me going. I don't understand how we could do this to people. So,
I mean, one of the things that I, always would say to people, I would share with them that, I come from a refugee background, and, and I tell people, it takes 20 years. I mean, if you're coming to the United States, it's 20. Your children will be great. They'll be, they'll be American. It'll be a good experience for them. But for you, like for my grandmother's, in her generation who came, I mean, it's quite brutal. It's because obviously, I mean, all these Afghans who were in top professional positions, or many of whom were in top professional positions, come here and they have to take. They have to start all over again their career, and it's tough, and and so make sure you're prepared for that, and obviously leaving behind family and friends, and the social structure of support is very different here. So I mean, it's a complex dynamic, and and then people who made the decision and made the commitment and were, coming here to have to deal with, and the fact is, I mean, I've effectively been a party to misleading these people to some extent. I mean, we're representing that, that this is, we're putting in all this effort to support the process and representing that it's a viable process. And here we are where that's in doubt. So, we're tainted, all of us who are working to help, support SIVs, we're party to this deceptive, potentially deceptive practice. So it's, nothing's more important than to try to get this resolved.
I agree. And it, that kind of hints at something that a lot of people who've come on the podcast have talked about: moral injury, the moral injury that has been inflicted upon volunteers, veterans who've been working to help SIV applicants, because, you're promised one thing, you're told this is what's happening. And then you're basically, like you said, you're being a party to misleading people. And that really is a moral injury in a way. It hurts your inner sense of what's right. And, that, I don't know if you feel that way in that sense.
It's, as I said earlier, it's insult on top of injury.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, but we're not giving up.
Go ahead.
We're not giving up. We're not giving up.
I'm glad, and I know that all of the employees who have faith in you are going to be glad to know that too, that they're not abandoned in this process. I wanted, I was looking at your curriculum vitae, and it's just very incredible how you have gone to different places and seen the way that you can help build societies that need development. And that's what you've also done. So I want to shift gears to AfghanHire. Here's a country where you're seeing it firsthand, just like so many of us did, where people with great skills are not able to use them. And I'd love to talk about how AfghanHire came into that vacuum and created something new.
Certainly. So the idea for AfghanHire was born out of the need to bring in additional resources to help us support the SIV work that I was doing. As I had mentioned earlier, Anham provided one assistant to me for a short period. Once that funding went away, I was on my own, and at that point, I had to stop accepting new SIV applicants. I mean, it was all I could do to support. I mean, I think at that point we may have had between 1,500 and 2,000 SIV applicants. But I mean, every day, we were receiving new requests for SIV support. And so I was trying to figure out, how we could take this forward. And so I was discussing it with some of our, what ended up becoming our advisory board, which were made up of executives from our Afghan subcontractors. The idea of basically finding Afghans who'd be willing to volunteer to support this process, to help me manage this process. And so we started that, I guess, in, maybe, summer, June or July 2022. And then, so we started to make contact. I was introduced to some Afghan, former professional staff that had worked on our contracts who were willing to volunteer. And so we started, by the late summer, we were, started to organize and plan for, the systems and processes so that they could actually help support the SIV process. And ultimately, in October of 2022, we initiated Batch 2, is what we call it, which was where we started processing all the new SIV applicants that had come in since we had stopped at the end of March 2022. And, we developed a whole new set of IT systems. So we separated Batch 1, which, that ultimately ended up having about, actually 3,000 applicants. So I've continued to maintain control over that myself personally. But all the additional applicants that have come in have been in Batch 2. So, and I guess by August of 2022, the idea occurred that, we could do something more significant here. If we're bringing in volunteers, these people need jobs, and so that, that led to the ideas around the, remote work concept. And I'll tell you this, my father had been in the employment services business. He started a company in the 1960s doing basically job fairs. He introduced, I think, maybe the first in the United States to offer job fairs. And he was initially focused on providing jobs to junior officers coming out of the military. And so I had never previously done any employment work, but I felt good about, hey, I think this is a chance for me to continue a family tradition. So, so we started, developing, a lot of infrastructure, in terms of developing systems to recruit job seekers, as we call them. We created about a dozen teams, professional teams. I mean, from accounting to engineering to IT to translation to business process analysis. I mean, I can go through and show you the whole list. The list is on our website. And so we recruited people. We had a process. So we set up systems for them to upload their resumes and and go through interview processes. And we were, and so that began really in December of 2022. And prior to that, one of the things we did, around the start of batch 2 was we reached out to approximately 70 Afghan subcontractors and asked if they would be willing to provide some funding to us, which would enable us to pay stipends to the staff working with SIVs. So we had a really good response to that. It wasn't big money, but it was enough that we were able to pay. We started paying stipends in December of 2022, to about a dozen staff, and we were, and we began that process, but before we started getting clients. But we recruited team, for all the different teams had team leaders and team supervisors, and we were, having all the teams were meeting together for training and preparation, and we began our client marketing activities in the second quarter of 2023. We had some really heady days, I would say, during that time. In the whole concept, obviously, of remote work, which has, I've been working, all my years at Anham, I worked from home. But, I had an office 10 miles away, so I would go into the office a few times a week, for meetings and what have you, but I knew the benefits of working, from home. And so, obviously with the COVID realization, and acceptance of remote work, what a perfect opportunity to offer jobs to individuals in countries in conflict, or, facing some sort of, economic crisis or social crisis. It should be a whole new dynamic for providing aid. It's so much more meaningful to provide people with compensable work than, just, a handout. Certainly for certain people in particular. Also people who are in the middle of their career, at let's say the prime of their career, to be cut off, which was the case for many of these Afghans. Cut off from all opportunity. That's tragic, and a horrible waste. And in my mind, the U.S. government should have set up a remote work program for Afghans in 2021, and said, look, you have the opportunity for an SIV, but we're going to give you the opportunity to get remote work, and so you'll have the choice to stay, and you won't have an economic need, to leave. Wouldn't that have made politically so much more sense, just within the United States to have, such an idea? And of course, if the U.S. government had been behind what we were doing, we could have hundreds of thousands employed right now. Part of the issue is acceptance. I think the biggest challenge we faced with AfghanHire is getting U.S. employers to get comfortable with the idea of working with, Afghans in Afghanistan. The issues of data security and, but all of that would have, it would have been alleviated to a significant extent if a program actually had the blessing of the United States. Why can't USAID be more creative? Why, and innovative? So, I tried to convince USAID to do that, but it didn't work.
Oh, yeah, it's such a difficult area to work in now. I know that there are some U.S. organizations that are trying to sponsor schools for girls, but even that, I think that breaks one of the Doha agreement we can't interfere with the running of the country. And if you're doing that, then you're interfering with the Taliban's, ban on education for girls. So, there's an interesting, this is obviously different outside of work, although women are not allowed to work in many circumstances. So you could, if you're employing women, you could be provoking the ire of the Taliban. I know that they are still working in some jobs.
Yeah, and we had actually a pretty significant partnership with a major Afghan company called Afghanistan Holding Group. And, they had large UN contracts and they hosted us. We had an office in their facilities for a period of time. I mean, they employ a large number of women and they have
Yeah.
dedicated work centers for women. And so they, that was evidence that it was achievable. So, part of our ambition was to offer, significant employment opportunities to women. And we had, it was a relatively small percentage, but we absolutely had, female, job seekers in our database, some who were very qualified.
I'm sure. And that's very neat. What kinds of jobs were they doing, just so that our listeners can understand just how diverse and well-educated Afghan women happen to be?
I can look it up exactly, but I don't have it at my fingertips. But one that I worked with directly was accounting. So we had, quite a few, female accountants who were very experienced, who were even in a team leadership role in our accounting team. We had translation. We had, we prepared. We had sort of video production system going. We have an issue with our website today, but we have a nice video you can see on our website introducing AfghanHire, and that was produced by our team. We have female narration, so our who did that work. So I think all the teams, all the teams had some women. For the most part. IT, engineering, marketing. So we had a social media team. So, there's a tremendous amount of talent, within the female workforce of Afghanistan, and basically our future is going to be focused on that.
Yeah, tell me about that. I want to hear more about how that works.
Well, basically, there's a very successful Afghan IT company that actually has a operation here in Northern Virginia, where I'm located, and so we've been sort of planning our next phase of operations with them, and they've had a lot of successful direct contracts with the U.S. government, including USAID and Department of Defense and state, and so they've been, they have an opportunity from USAID to develop a remote work program focused on helping women in Afghanistan. So we're currently working on a proposal for USAID to actually get the funding to launch this. And so to build off all the infrastructure and work that we've done with AfghanHire, and I think the most critical part of this will be just getting some sort of endorsement from the U.S. government, from USAID, and helping us to engage with employers. The possibilities are so significant. Once we can get over the issue of trust, or if there's because AfghanHire was a small ragtag team, basically, of people working to pursue sort of a dream concept here, and so this is what we've been we're waiting for, to have the right connection that would enable us to really make this a reality, and then to go beyond Afghanistan. This concept in many could be rolled out worldwide.
Yeah.
So hopefully all this effort will result in something that is meaningful and long lasting.
I think it's so imaginative and important. That's, like I said, I was looking at your CV and just thinking, wow, bringing the economy up in a country really can change that country. And so in places where people need work and they have that experience, like, get them working, get them to, I think that's really valuable.
Well, and of course, there's also a refugee crisis, worldwide. And, I think, so a real solution, is to offer people economic opportunities through remote work. Some will still choose to come, but, many are truly coming, for purely economic reasons. And if they understood that, whether in Afghanistan or another country, that they, had a source of income and professional development and what have you, it makes so much sense. To keep these people, instead of the brain drain,
Right.
that's tragic. I mean, for Afghanistan, it's tragic.
Right. And that's the thing about the SIV program that I find I really don't think, and I've said this many times, I don't think the US government realized how many people it employed who would be eligible for SIV in so many sectors of Afghanistan. And, the Taliban might not see their work as valuable right now as they try to transition into governing and, keeping the economy alive. Think about the amount of the economy they lost when they said women couldn't work in jobs anymore. It's baffling, but yeah, I think we just had no idea. And now you are pulling the best and brightest back here. And, you promise that opportunity. If you make a promise, you better follow through on that promise, but also be aware that when you're doing that, here's what you're doing to the country. And it just makes it all that much easier for the Taliban to continue to exert influence and keep women, away from society. And it's just...
Well, I mean, the Taliban would have welcomed, I think, a remote work opportunity for women. I mean, they're technically not against employment of women. They
right,
just
women
have,
being
segregated,
right,
in terms of their workspace. But it's so easy to create, work centers for women that are run by women. I mean, I hope that's where we're headed. So, it's just remote work being what it is. It's an incredible solution to so many issues, so many regions of the world.
Sure. I do not disagree with you, although I would really like to just see the Taliban realize that women are people too. That would be my greatest hope, and I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. But that's a story for another day.
Well, I believe there's a constituency of Taliban that would support it. The problem is you've got other extremists, who are controlling the situation, but they may pass on at some point, and hopefully things will evolve.
Well, and that at least they're sending their daughters to get educated outside of the country. So aren't you the biggest hypocrite of all, Yeah. It matters when it's their daughters, but the daughters of Afghanistan, no, they don't need to. Oh, how again, baffling. Everything is baffling these days. What a world we live in. Well, is there anything about the future of AfghanHire that you want to note before we wrap things up today?
I mean, I'm proud of what we've achieved so far, but I hope it's just sort of foundational for what we may achieve in the future. I mean, we're committed to having an impact, and it's been an honor to do this work in so many ways, and I hope the U.S. government I'd like to help the U.S. government do the right thing. Both in terms of the SIV support and in terms of, giving Afghans an option to stay in Afghanistan. It's not too late. They've been so slow processing SIVs. If we could get a good jobs program going, there could be a significant number that might choose to stay. Now, it'd be nice to also say to them that, look, you can get approved for an SIV, but you don't have to come immediately. Give them an opportunity to stay for a few years and decide if they want to come. I mean, then you'd be helping Afghanistan to get back on its feet.
Yes. And honestly, though, I think we have 140,000 plus SIV applicants, and we got 12,000 additional SIVs on top of the 8,000 that were remaining. So we have 20,000 right now available, which, given how difficult it was to pull blood from that stone, and the fact that there are so many contingents of Afghans who still don't qualify, who should, judges, special forces personnel who worked alongside our military personnel. And they still don't qualify for SIV, even though there are so many people trying to get them to qualify through different legal methods. Regardless, it was seriously difficult to get those 12,000 allocated. So who knows what's going to happen next year when we need more allocated. And there could be 120,000 applicants with all of their family members, right? That's just primary applicants. That's not wives, children. That could be 120,000 people who are still in Afghanistan and need a way to get by.
Yeah.
So,
and, yeah. So it will require creative solutions.
yeah, absolutely. That would help add to Afghanistan and give people, an ability to have some freedom, outside of maybe the strictures of what they're living under. That, their employment can be a way that they have some personal freedom and get to experience democracy in some way, or, just have something fulfilling.
Yeah. A connection to the world, to the global economy, to, there's so much is possible. We just need to be more creative in how we spend money.
Yes. And I just think it's a really awesome, everybody would ask me, do you know of any place I can get a job? That was the most common question outside of, can you help me with my SIV, for years, from when I started covering this really in depth in late 21. And I would always tell people, I don't really know of anything. And now I have something I can tell them, which is really a fantastic thing, that there is an opportunity. There is light at the end of that tunnel, regardless of what happens with an SIV. So
inshallah.
Inshallah, always, right? That's a constant refrain. Well, Beau, it was really great to have you and to talk about these two very important issues. And I'm hoping that we'll talk soon with really good news about, calm revocations and denials, and maybe there will be answers coming, and inshallah. Again, right? Again, we hope. I'm excited to see what happens with AfghanHire. I think you're on a great path to make so much change, not just in Afghanistan, but around the world. So I think that's an amazing outgrowth of all of this.
I appreciate your interest and, being able to share this with your community of listeners, all of whom I think, or many of whom are involved in the same work. So, it's important that we support each other during these challenges that we face. So thank you for your work.
Oh, well, much appreciated. I'm glad to be part of this community. It's good to feel like there are people who understand the unique strangeness of the last 2.5 years. They have been difficult, but there's always the bright side. And, Amy Sins was on this past week talking about how, she does disaster relief in New Orleans, and she got pulled into Afghanistan. And now she's helped people get out of Gaza, get out of Israel, get out of Haiti, just so many different disasters. She's been able to apply those skills she learned in Afghanistan and help people elsewhere. And it's just so amazing. And just like AfghanHire, it starts here, but where else can it go? And I think that's what we're all called to do in the world. Find what you can do that makes life better for other people, and go do it with reckless abandon. Maybe not reckless abandon, but do it.
Well, we hope AfghanHire is next.
Yeah, I look forward to hearing about it. That is a place where economic opportunity can make so much good happen. So I'm excited for you, Beau, and just thank you again. And before we close today, I want to say two things. First, we always like to close our episodes with letters from Afghan listeners, because it's not the same to just have Western voices out here. And we haven't had any listener letters in quite some time. So for any Afghan listeners out there, we want to hear your stories. You can send them in via audio file. We can meet and record with no faces if you want, but we want to hear about your experiences. So please reach out through the Afghanistan Project Podcast at gmail.com if you want to share any part of your story throughout your lifetime. We're interested. I also want to thank all our listeners for sharing your time, for supporting the people of Afghanistan, and just being part of this community. If you've enjoyed the episode, please make sure you're following our YouTube page and that you've enabled notifications so that you can get those great notifications when new episodes come out. And Tasha Kaur, as always, and hope to see you again soon.
Manana.